Whittier Birthplace in Haverhill, Massachusetts is open from late April through the end of October. Beginning in 1688, the Whittier family occupied the site for 5 generations, a site located on the outskirts almost 4 miles from the center of town. There in 1807, the Quaker poet and abolitionist John Greenleaf Whittier was born. The birthplace was opened in 1893 and is maintained for visitors so that the love and memory of Whittier might forever be cherished. It was one of the first house museums in New England. The principal tour guide and impresario of the birthplace is Gus Resch, a retired schoolteacher with a gift for storytelling and a warm, generous enthusiasm for the place and its subject. John Greenleaf Whittier was a major literary figure in 19th century America, one of our most renowned poets in an age before TV, records, or radio, when poetry was a major art form, central to the everyday lives of its time. Poets were like rock stars. In 1866, Whittier published Snowbound, a winter idyll, dedicated to the household it describes. Here are some excerpts. The sun that brief December day rose cheerless over hills of gray, and darkly circled gave at noon a sadder light than waning moon. Unwarmed by any sunset light, the gray day darkened into night, a night made hoary with the swarm and whirl dance of the blinding storm. And when the second morning shone, we looked upon a world unknown, no cloud above, no earth below, a universe of sky and snow. Because it was preserved shortly after his death, not only the birthplace, but the larger setting, the barns, fields, and 13 sites associated with Snowbound can be experienced and seen. Part of the Whittier story is how a teacher sharing a copy of Robert Burns' poetry inspired him. This is the very book that he borrowed as a young man that launched his life in a world of art. One of the incredible things about the Whittier homestead is it never was out of the family. In fact, it's the rarest thing in all of museumdom, a time capsule. Every object in the house was family-owned, and it tells a story. Now let's hear from tour guide Gus Resch.
No, 3 families lived here for 56 years until Mr. Whittier died. But when Mr. Whittier died, one of his friends, James Hazen Carlton, said, I have to do something nice for my friend. He bought back 69 of the original 150 acres of land and deeded it to the Whittier Club of Haverhill.
What was that Whittier Club?
It was the rich and the powerful, you know.
Why was it named that?
For John Greenleaf Whittier, because he became so famous.
Yeah, okay, so they loved him here.
Oh,
So they
yes.
wanted to associate themselves with him.
Yeah.
So when his friend bought it, he deeded it to the club with 2 stipulations. One, you can never sell another piece of this land forever, in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And the other was you have to open this as a museum to the public. So everything came back.
And that was in 1898.
This was in 1893.
Oh, 93.
1893.
So the stuff was out all.
But when his sister was dying, one of his nieces came to take care of him, Lizzie Whittier. And she took care of her Aunt Elizabeth till she passed away in the Amesbury home. And then she stayed 20 years in Amesbury taking care of her uncle, because he was probably useless in the home. You know, the women ran the home in those days, and there was no woman left. But after he became famous, she moved away. She married and moved away and up to Portland, Maine. And when he became famous with Snowbound, 1866, that's when it was the first printing, Mr. Whittier went from poverty-stricken to $10,000 for one poem.
Really? Now, did he give speeches too? How did these poets make money in those days? In other words, because you couldn't get $500 to write a poem today.
No, but back in those days, after Snowbound, he became like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
A celebrity.
Yeah, he was a celebrity overnight. He was like a rock star overnight after Snowbound.
But maybe did they go around and do readings and things? In other words,
He never did.
okay.
He was a very shy individual.
Hmm.
If he went to a meeting with the famous poets, Emerson and Holmes,
Yeah,
and they all had to read a poem of their own,
he'd read one.
no, he wouldn't. He would give the poem to Longfellow, and Longfellow would read John Greenleaf Whittier's poem.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you're saying this is the most famous hearth in America
In
in literature,
yes.
because this is this famous snowbound
Yeah,
hearth.
this is the Snowbound hearth. When the family was here.
His daughter, his niece Lizzie, was instrumental in preserving his legacy.
Oh, yes. When he died, she's with her husband up in Portland. In the will, she gets the Amesbury home. The Amesbury home by this time is huge. Because when Mr. Whittier was writing the anti-slavery poems, he had someone in England who became his benefactor.
Wow.
Joseph.
7 miles away in the neighboring town of Amesbury, the Whittier Home Association operates a second house museum with a completely different story. The two complement each other. This one, also founded in 1898, is one of the earliest house museums in New England. By the time Whittier moved here, he was quite well off. He'd done well, and making quite a bit of money from his poetry. This is his study, pretty much untouched, exactly the way it looked the day he died. Whittier, here pictured at the center of this 1856 print titled Champions of Freedom, was a lionized figure in the abolitionist community of the pre-Civil War era. Also shown are Horace Greeley, William Seward, Charles Sumner, Henry Ward Beecher, Salmon P. Chase, and John P. Hale. Whittier was a founding member of the American Anti-Slavery Society, an organization that sought to bring about emancipation. It began with a convention in 1833 in Philadelphia. 62 individuals participated, 21 of them were Quakers, and again they agreed to bring about the end of slavery through nonviolent means. Wherever the eye lights in this fascinating house, there are artifacts that speak to Whittier's involvement with the anti-slavery movement. This wonderful and evocative painting shows the snowbound hearth in the birthplace, 7 miles away. Death masks were an unusual social custom of the period. This is the one made of Whittier after his death in the 1890s. 2 miles from the Whittier homestead is the Union Cemetery where John Greenleaf Whittier is buried. The two houses and cemetery make for a fascinating destination experience, and while you're there, take in the Buttonwoods Museum of the Haverhill Historical Society, a treasure trove of local legend and material culture. If you like history, literature, and art, it would be hard to have a more delightful experience than we had visiting these three extraordinary small museums, a bit off the beaten path near the popular North Shore of Boston.